Good day, everyone. It is my pleasure to be your research person for this day. I hope that I could be able to give you some new ideas and tips in creating the research methodology in your research. So let's start now our session objective. Our objective for today is to scrutinize the contents of the research methodology. The first tip that I am going to give you is that you need to know your institutional research format because every institution has its own research template or format. So when you receive the skeletal format or template, that would be your guidelines in creating your whole research. That's very important that you actually know what is expected from you and what are the things that you need to include in your research. When we say research methodology, it explains how you are going to investigate and analyze your data for a certain research topic. Research methodology in Germanic format used by chapters. So for methodology, it is chapter 3. And for IMRAD format, it includes introduction, method, and results, and discussion. This part discusses the following elements: research design, respondents or participants, locale of the study, sample and sampling technique, research instrument, data gathering, treatment of the data, or data analysis. Ethical consideration. Some research template, they include ethical consideration. However, some research template, they say that every part of the research methodology, ethical consideration must be integrated. Okay, our research design in terms of research inquiry mode, we have two, the quantitative and qualitative research design. We also have the third type, which is the combination of the two called mixed method. For a neophyte researcher, I highly suggest to master first the pure quantitative and pure qualitative type of research before trying to do a mixed method type of research design. So quantitative research, it is used to quantify the problem by generating data that can be used statistically. It is used to quantify attitudes, opinions, behaviors, or variables. This method will measure the level of occurrences on the basis of numbers. It relates to aspects that can be quantified and expressed in terms of quantity. In this type of research, the objectives, design, sample, and all the other factors influencing the research is predetermined, otherwise known as structured research, because qualitative is more on flexible or less structured. This sample size is typically quite large. Methods of quantitative research include online surveys, paper surveys, telephone interviews, and polls. On the other hand, the qualitative research is primarily exploratory research. It is used to gain understanding, reasons, opinions, and motivations. Qualitative research is used to discover trends and dig deeper into information and or problems. Qualitative methods are based on words, perceptions, feelings, rather than numbers, and they include questionnaires with open-ended questions. Methods on qualitative research include focus group discussion, interviews, and observations. The sample size is usually small and respondents are selected to fulfill a quota. The main difference between inductive and deductive reasoning is that inductive reasoning aims at developing a theory, while deductive reasoning aims at testing an existing theory. Inductive reasoning moves from specific observation to broad generalization, and deductive reasoning the other way around. And then quantitative research is generalizable because we are using a sample size to generalize the responses of a certain population. While in qualitative, usually we are using purposive sampling, or the participants of the study has a unique characteristics. And that's what a qualitative research becomes generalizable. For other difference, quantitative may take little time to conduct, especially now that everyone is in the online world. You can use online polls or surveys. You can easily collect data if you are knowledgeable in statistical tool applications. You put your data in the application and then generate it. And qualitative, it takes a great deal of time to conduct. You need to interview, which can take a lot of time from you. And after that, that's the time you can analyze the data. So those are the types of research design in terms of inquiry mode. But under that, we still have specific research types. In terms of research inquiry mode, we already know that we have quantitative and qualitative. Let's start first with quantitative research designs. Usually, the quantitative research design is divided into experimental and non-experimental research design. There are so many types, but I just want to share with you the most common types. There are four main types of quantitative research design, and they are descriptive research design, correlational research design, quasi-experimental research design, and experimental research design. Okay, let's discuss briefly the different quantitative research designs. Descriptive research design is used to understand a phenomenon, a situation, or a population. Unlike experimental research, descriptive research does not involve the manipulation of certain variables. Rather, it seeks only to observe and measure the variables in order to investigate them. This research design is used when trying to identify characteristics, categories, and trends. The most common method of collecting descriptive research are through polls and surveys. The example of descriptive topics would probably the most popular social media apps for senior high school students, or the preferred learning modality of senior high school students. Next, correlational research is a non-experimental research method which used to identify a relationship between two variables with no influence from any extraneous variable, which means there is no manipulation between variables. The correlation between the two variables will reflect the direction and or strength of their relationship. The direction of correlation can either be positive, negative, or zero correlation. So what is the meaning of positive, negative, and zero correlation? Positive correlation denotes that both variables change in the same directions. And a negative correlation denotes that the variables change in opposite directions. A zero correlation denotes that there is no relationship between the variables being studied. Next, experimental research, also known as true experimentation, aims to measure the effect of one or more independent variables on one or more dependent variables with the use of scientific method. This is done by manipulating the independent variable to study its effects on the dependent variable. Let us first define what is independent variable. It is a standalone variable and is changed by other variable. On the other hand, dependent variable is what we measure in the experiment, meaning it depends on the independent variable. This experimental research design involves conducting a set of procedures to test the hypothesis of the study. Subjects with experimental research are randomly assigned to groups rather than being assigned to groups using non-random criteria. Next, similar to the experimental research design, Quasi-experimental research also aims to identify a cause and effect relationship between two variables, an independent variable and a dependent variable. However, quasi-experiment involves subjects being assigned to groups based on non-random criteria. This is different from a true experiment that relies on the random assignments of subjects. This research design is often employed when true experiments cannot be carried out due to practical or ethical reasons. A notable advantage of this design is that it has a higher external validity than most true experiments, as it often involves real-world interventions as opposed to an artificial laboratory setting. Now, types of qualitative research design. So there are many types of qualitative research design. I only selected the common ones. We have ethnography, narrative, phenomenological, grounded theory, and case study. Ethnographic studies are qualitative procedures utilized to describe, analyze, and interpret cultural characteristics. Ethnography is used when a researcher wants to study a group of people to gain a large understanding of their lives or specific aspects of their lives. The primary data collection method is through observation over an extended period of time. It would also be appropriate to interview others who have studied the same cultures. In ethnography, research do immersion. Ethnography has its roots in cultural anthropology, where researchers immerse themselves with the culture, often for years, rather than relying on interviews or survey. You experience the environment firsthand and sometimes as a participant observer. Next, the narrative. The narrative approach weaves together a sequence of events, usually from just one or two individuals, to form a cohesive story. You conduct in-depth interviews, real documents, and look for themes. In other words, how does an individual story illustrate the larger life influences that created it? Often, interviews are conducted over weeks, months, or even years, but the final narrative doesn't need to be in chronological order. Rather, it can be presented as a story or narrative with themes and can be reconcile conflicting stories and highlight tensions and challenges, which can be opportunities for innovation. For example, topic about working students, person living with cancer, a prospective student applying for college, or a working mom. Next, phenomenology is used to identify phenomena and focus on subjective experiences and understanding the structures of those lived experiences. The primary data collection method is through in-depth interviews. In a phenomenological study, you use a combination of methods such as conducting interviews, reading documents, watching videos, or visiting places and events. To understand the meaning participants place on whatever being examined, you rely on the participants' own perspectives to provide insight into their motivations. Next, grounded theory. Grounded theory is a systematic procedure of data analysis that allows researchers to develop a theory that explains a specific phenomenon. The unit of analysis in grounded theory is a specific phenomenon or incident, not individual behaviors. The primary data collection method is through interviews of approximately 20 to 30 participants or until data achieves saturation. You use primarily interviews and existing documents to build a theory based on the data. For example, a grounded theory study could involve understanding how software developers use portals to communicate and write code, or how small retail merchants approve or decline customers for credit. Next, case studies are to be used when one, the researcher wants to focus on how and why. Two, the behavior is to be observed, not manipulated. Three, to further understand a given phenomenon. And four, if the boundaries between the context and phenomena are not clear. Multiple methods can be used to gather data, including interviews, observations, and historical documentation. For example, case study of how a large multinational company started from small businesses, or maybe a case study on becoming a class valedictorian. Participants or respondents of the study. When we say population, it means a complete set of person or object that possess some common characteristics. When we say sample, it's a subset of the entire population of a group of individuals that represents the population. It also serves as the respondents or the participants of the study. Example, your target population is the senior high school of Maganda Senior High School, and you are about to do a survey. You don't need to access all the students of Maganda. You just need to get a sample size from the population for you to save time and effort. Sampling is the process of selecting a few from the population to become the basis for estimating or predicting the prevalence of an unknown piece of information. So in getting the sample size, we have different ways how to get it. In getting it, there should be a reason on how you get your sampling size. In getting the sample size, you can use the Slovin formula. We also have the online calculator like this, for example, the RASOF. Or you can use the G-power. There are two types of sampling methods. Probability sampling, which involves random selection, allowing you to make strong statistical inferences about the whole group. Next is the non-probability sampling, which involves non-random selection based on convenience or other criteria, allowing you to easily collect data. You should clearly explain how you selected your sample in the methodology section of your paper or thesis. Simple random sampling. In a simple random sample, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Your sampling frame should include the whole population. To conduct this type of sampling, you can use tools like random number generators or other techniques that are based entirely on chance. You want to select a simple random sample of 50 senior high school of Maganda Senior High School. You assign a member to every student from 1 to 1,000 and use a random number generator to select 50 numbers. It can be a lottery or a fishbowl form as long as everyone has the chance of being selected. Systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is similar to simple random sampling, but is usually slightly easier to conduct. Every member of the population is listed with a number, but instead of randomly generating numbers, for example, all employees of the company are listed in alphabetical order. From the first 10 numbers, you randomly selected a starting point, number 6. From number 6 onwards, every 10th person on the list is selected. So, for example, 6, 16, 26, 36, and so on. And you end up with a sample of 100 people. Next, stratified sampling. It involves dividing the population into subpopulations that may differ in important ways. It allows you to draw more precise conclusion by ensuring that every subgroup is properly represented in the sample. Cluster sampling. It also involves dividing the population into subgroups, but each subgroup should have similar characteristics to the whole sample. Instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you randomly select entire subgroups. If it is practically possible, you might include every individual for each sampled cluster. If the cluster themselves are large, you can also sample individuals from within each cluster using one of the techniques above. This is called multi-stage sampling. So now, what are the non-probability sampling method? We have convenience sample. We also have quota sampling, purposive sample or judgment, and snowball sampling. Let's start with convenience sampling. When we say convenience sampling, is perhaps the easiest method of sampling because participants are selected based on availability and willingness to take part. Useful results can be obtained, but the results are prone to significant bias because those who volunteer to take part may be different from those who choose not to volunteer, and the sample may not be representative of other characteristics such as age or sex. Next, quota sampling. This method of sampling is often used by market researchers. Interviews are given a quota or subjects of a specified type to attempt to recruit. For example, an interview might be told to go out and select 20 adult men, 20 adult women, 10 teenage girls, and 10 teenage boys, so that they could interview them about their television viewing. Ideally, the quotas chosen would proportionally represent characteristics of the underlying population. Next, judgment or purposive sampling. Also known as selective or subjective sampling, this technique relies on judgment of the researcher when choosing who to ask to participate. Researchers may implicitly thus choose a representative sample to suit their needs or specifically approach individuals with certain characteristics. This approach is often used by media when canvassing the public for opinions and in qualitative research. Next, snowball sampling. This method is commonly used in social sciences when investigating hard-to-reach groups. Existing subjects are asked to nominate further subjects known to them. So the sample increases in size like a rolling snowball. For example, when carrying out a survey of risk behavior amongst intravenous drug users, participants may be asked to nominate other users to be interviewed. That's all. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something from me today. God bless us all.